And I think Tanita's waiting in the wings to give us perhaps a more institutional research culture perspective. So I will hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Thank you very much, Sam, for the invitation. Hopefully you can see my slides now. So I'm Tanita, I'm the Head of Research Policy. Is that working okay? Just checking.
Yeah.
Fine. Fantastic.
Just need full screen it, yeah.
Yeah, fine. So I'm Tanita, I'm the Head of Research Policy at the University of Glasgow, where I'm also the institutional co-lead for culture alongside Miles Padgett, who's a physicist in our institution, and also the previous Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research. And I work with many other, it's part of a big team, of which Elizabeth Adams in our research office is a key part. So I come at this topic from an institutional perspective and actually from an institution-wide perspective. And I'm interested in the sorts of interventions by which we can make change and also how we can make those changes stick. So of all the things that we can do, which ones are going to give us the most rewards and how likely are these to be self-sustaining? So when creating incentives to do things differently, do we operate at the level of the institution or at the level of the individual? Do we work from an institutional framework or do we work more with individual disciplines and the variation between them? How many things can we do as an institution and how many do we need the collaboration and cooperation of the sector more widely? That might be other institutions or funders or publishers. And to what extent do we try and intervene direct in what we want to do? And to what extent do we try to create the environment that makes those desired behaviours more likely? So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that research practice fits within a much broader and more complicated environment that includes how we support careers, how we create incentives, the funding structure that we have, the dynamics within groups. And so how do we influence that broader environment so that the quality of our research is improved and the incidence of bad science decreases? So I'm going to start with something that probably we won't disagree on, which is if we want to improve the way our research, then we need to improve and focus on how research is done. And if we want to improve how research is done, we need to focus on developing better habits. And so this is a quote from a Nature editorial from last year, basically saying that the biggest impact on research integrity is achieved through sustained improvements in day-to-day research practices. And so that might be open research, it might be better data management, it might be better techniques, but that aspect of it, so creating better approaches is better than just weeding out a few bad actors. So that being the case, I have a couple of observations. The first is that, as I've said before, integrity is one of many interlinked activities. We can focus on solving integrity, but actually we won't do that successfully unless we also incorporate all the things that sit around that. Support for careers, for example, the incentives, the funding structure and so on. The second thing I would say that in the UK at least, we are a little bit constrained by compliance measures. So when we're looking at all these different activities, we're very much responding to sector level requirements. And I've put a list here of some of the ones that we have to be involved in at institutional level. The Concord Act to support research integrity is of course particularly relevant here, but also we have a duty to use metrics responsibly, to be inclusive in our practices and so on and so on, develop accountability towards our funding bodies, support careers, Concordat and open data, REF, and also assurance for how we spend our funding. And actually within an institution, all of these different strands of activity will be the responsibility of different parts of the organisation. Okay, the library will be handling open data, HR, bullying and harassment, the research office will be dealing with career support and so on. And so what we really need to do actually is try to bring all of this together to create a much more supportive environment in which research practice or good research practice becomes the norm. And so I've modified this quote slightly to basically reflect the focus of this conversation, which is that the biggest impact on research quality is achieved through sustained improvements in our day-to-day research culture. And that means support for careers, recognition for individual contributions and diverse contributions to research, as well as diverse outputs. And that all of this is a better approach than dealing with these strands individually in a fragmented manner. So this is what we've been doing at Glasgow as well. So I'll take you through some of the examples of what we've been putting in place and the lessons that we've learned along the way. So the first thing we did, which I think I would recommend to anyone trying to do this, is to define what is meant by culture and what you mean by a positive research culture within your institution, which might also not be at the level of the institution. It might be at the level of the division, the school, or even just your research group. So we have 3 different aims here. We'd like to create a culture in which colleagues are recognised and valued for their varied contributions to research activity. If we want to work towards bigger things, then we need to recognise that this will involve collaboration, and that will involve collaboration from different career stages, from different disciplines, different sectors, but actually different job families as well, including our technical staff. And if we want those collaborations to happen and we value them, then we need to value the contributions and reward those contributions to make those contributions most likely. We also want to create an environment in which we support each other's careers. You know, we are in an environment where too often there is a hierarchical structure within our research teams or within our research institutions. How do we make support for careers a basic activity that academics both need to engage in and that they are rewarded for doing, so that create a community in which we share what we know and share our contacts? And then importantly for this discussion, we also want to create an environment that supports work that meets the highest standards of academic rigour. Okay, whether that is pushing the boundaries of knowledge, changing society, whatever that contribution is, let's ensure that it stands the test of time. And one of the things that I suppose we have been very keen on is not just to follow policies. There's lots of concordats, there's lots of policies that we develop in response to those. There were policies that we develop internally to meet our values, but actually the most important thing we can do to their communities is actually to think about actions. So how do we develop a number of actions, big actions, small actions, varied actions that are aligned to each other such that we push the culture in the right direction? So the screen grab at the middle of this slide is a very short video, 2 or 3 minute video that we have made, which is open to everyone to look at, about how we implement our priorities and what they are. We also have a statement on research culture that tells our community what we've done, what we're going to do, and how we're going to measure our progress. And we also have a 5-year action plan for research culture that doesn't just set out what we're going to do and hold us accountable for that, but it also sort of spells out what the dimensions of culture are. And so it's about the visibility and the openness and the career development and the support for collaboration, so that we don't leave it to people's imagination as to what we mean by culture. So as I've said, change becomes more likely when we align our agendas and actions. And here are some examples of what we've been doing at Glasgow. We divide up our actions into 4 different categories. We want to support what we value, and we try to do that consistently. We then reward what we value, celebrate what we value, and monitor how we're doing. So for example, under the support what we value category, if we're serious about implementing metrics responsibly, then how do people get a sense of that? Clearly we have a policy, but we also have piloted within our strategic recruitment schemes a mechanism whereby applicants can select their 4 most important or most significant outputs and describe in a narrative what significance it had and also what their contribution was. They can use the credit taxonomy, or they can describe it in any other way. We have, in the context of integrity specifically, developed a network of integrity advisors that are there to advise on things like openness or just advise on things like authorship. And also, if we're keen on and if we're serious about collaboration, then let's ensure that we provide career paths for those who do not follow a traditional career path. That's the first step in ensuring that we reward what we say we value. And again, nothing gets more attention than our promotions criteria. And so as of the current promotions round, we have required anyone being promoted to professor or being promoted between professorial zones to demonstrate a commitment to collegiality through practical actions. And we've also required open research and parity for different types of research outputs. Our Research Culture Awards allows us not just to celebrate those who embody our values, but also allows us to share practice across the university about what we want to see. And our culture survey tells us what we might be doing well, what different units are doing and how well they're progressing, and where we need to put more investment and attention, and at what level that investment and attention needs to go in. Is it institutional level or is it local? But I think the worst thing we can do is come up with lots and lots of different actions. The most important thing, I think, is to have them converge on what are the most important and most powerful leverage points within, in our case, the research culture. And that belongs to research quality. What do we mean by quality? And then how do we use that knowledge and that understanding and embed that in support for careers? So our principles of culture change are hopefully clear from what I've said. So we have an ethos at the University of Glasgow that the university succeeds where the individuals succeed. So there's no misalignment between what people want for themselves and what the university wants for itself. We develop actions that are aligned to each other, and we have an institutional framework and work closely with the disciplines so that they can choose what things fit in with their own disciplinary requirements. And we work closely with the sector as well as much as possible, because there's only so many things that we can do on our own. So what things do I think do we need to work together on? Well, we need to decide and agree on how we want to evaluate research quality. If we want quality over quantity, what do we mean? I can do it for myself, I can do it for Glasgow, but I don't want our staff in Glasgow paying a career tax when they move anywhere else. If we value collaboration and openness, how do we do that so that the careers that we develop here and the track records that we develop here are also the same ones that will be recognised in other settings, for example, on grant panels? As I've said before, my feeling is that, in universities we do research, we do teaching, and the third output of what we do is our people. So how do we ensure that we support those who support the careers of others and make that the central pillar of university activity? We can also be very efficient about what we do. We can develop policies, all of which look the same. How about we coordinate a bit better, have similar policies, and focus our attention on how we implement and how we share our knowledge about how we implement and what works. And then one of the most important ones of all, we only do so much within institutions to address the hyper-competitive and very steep career pyramid that our researchers have. And how do we work with the sector to try and make that better? So I've got the E word on this slide, but I hope you know what I mean, which is that when we talk about research culture, we're not talking about a separate strand of activity from everything else that we do. Research culture is actually what allows more of us to excel, rather than a separate strand of activity that needs to be dealt with by different people. It's the same people, the same structures that reward careers and evaluate quality are those that need to be thinking about culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanita. That was extremely detailed, and there's loads of questions coming in at the moment, so I don't want to waste time rambling on. I'll just start firing them at you. So I think when we talk about culture, of course, for many people, it's a very broad and all-encompassing term. And so some of the people have asked, some of our audience members, is how do you value research culture, qualitative or quantitative, and what kind of awards are given? And I think that also feeds into a question that we were discussing, which is, there are a number of ways in which culture can be improved, but which of them would you say is the strongest lever?
So the first question then, whether we're evaluating quantitative or qualitative. This is the second year that we've run the Culture Awards, and some way last year was a pilot, and we have learned from that. We wanted to be as inclusive as possible, in that we wanted to ensure that we were rewarding either individuals or teams from all job families. And we were very clear that we wanted to see if improvements either at the local area or the discipline area, or indeed at the level of the sector. So anything that improved practice or the environment in which research is taking place would have been rewarded. In the main, this was generally to do with things like supporting peers or more junior colleagues to understand what constitutes good practice. So it might be journal clubs or hackathons or mechanisms of this sort that ensured that knowledge was shared. Now, so I would say in response to the question, I would say it was broadly qualitative. And we allowed people to bring testimonials, but we wanted to ensure that there was some robustness behind it, so that it wasn't people doing it in the course of their normal job, as in it was more and going over and above the responsibilities that they had to contribute to the community. The second question was around the strongest lever. So the strongest lever for culture, I think, is what I've said there, which is support for careers. How do we reward those who support careers for that support? And similarly, therefore, how do we ensure that there is support for careers for that all to work? if the question was around the biggest lever for quality, I would say that visibility and openness is, because openness and visibility is what all researchers want for themselves. And I think we want that for them. And that gives them the ability to share their ideas, for others to build on their ideas, to improve those ideas. And by sharing, if they can, their data and their methods, they're also getting an improvement in their approach. So I think visibility hits lots of different priorities that I think researchers ought to wish for themselves.
Thank you. I think slightly related to that is from Nathan. He says he really enjoyed the talk. Has a question. A lot of the burden for changing scientific practice tends to fall on early career researchers, yet structurally they have the least incentives to pursue and advocate open science approaches. How can universities specifically help support ECRs doing advocating open research?
Yeah. So there's lots. I mean, in some ways, get involved, and I think places like Glasgow have, I think, quite a visible research culture and have visible people who you can speak to. So just to give an example, 2 of the awards that were given last time round in our Research Culture Award went to early career researchers. I guess we liaise with them on a very sort of regular basis, and some of them run the journal clubs and the promotion sort of locally. What we also have is an integrity advisor and champion network. They're very welcome to get involved in that as well. In fact, something that we've learned from establishing these groups is that sometimes it's not the senior positions that actually are the best, make the best advisors and the best champions. Perhaps they're not there, perhaps they're not seen as being accessible. And so those are roles that they can fulfill as well.
Yeah, I've got one last question because I think it's slightly related, and I'm sorry for those that we haven't yet been able to answer. And I assume this person is an early career researcher because they say my institution research leaders have warned me off working on research culture events and discussions with key teams across the organisation. They say they want to coordinate it, but they do nothing. Any advice?
I suppose if someone has a passion for this and has ideas and you're getting resistance, I would say 2 things. Why is there resistance? So in that case, can their passion and interest in culture be reformulated as benefiting them and their career? Because that's what the PI or whatever would want. The second thing is don't give up and try to do things locally if you can't do them at institutional level. There's lots and lots of things that can be done locally, everything from inducting new members of staff to developing, as I said, journal clubs. They're actually, and things will then, I suppose, develop from there. I think we try and do things at scale. But actually, certainly our experience is you start small, people get involved with what you're doing because they see an interest in it, and then things will develop from there. So, but I applaud this person's passion and commitment to this.
Thank you. I think we're coming up to our break now. I mean, I certainly would echo that from mine and Sam's experiences. You know, we're doing something sort of slightly outside of our institutions, but we've come together and there is a platform. And so we'd be very happy to discuss how to do this kind of thing, perhaps outside of our institutions, and identify people within an institution that can help you to address it.